my name is Yesenia Cisneros, and I am the producer on Minecraft Earth. Making games is hard. Oftentimes, we're stuck between executive demands, tight deadlines, and the realities of what the team can deliver. What if I told you there's a way that you can ship on quality while aligning on these goals and not bringing your team out? This is building features, how to get it done, and make it fun. Growing up in New York, I spent a lot of time outside, rollerblading, playing handball with my friends, or super soakers. When I wasn't outside, I'd be with my brother taking on the role of player 2, playing some Super Mario Brothers, track and field, or practicing our best Kamehamehas between Dragon Ball Z commercials. Growing up with this kind of culture with my brother in gaming and geeking industry, I just felt kind of alienated. I felt like I didn't really belong in any group because liking these kinds of things felt too white. And so I didn't fit in with my Hispanic community and I didn't fit in with my white friends. And so I just felt like an outcast. I never knew that I'd be able to make a career in games. And here I am 11 years later, loving what I do. It all started in 2004. So I was attending Penn State University, going to be a doctor, and an anesthesiologist to be exact. This is something that I wanted to do since the 5th grade. At that time, a special game came into my life also. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called Halo 2, which is a first-person shooter game, and you fight a bunch of aliens. This changed my life for me. Essentially, this was my first experience having a multiplayer experience with people all over the world. I got very involved in the gaming community ever since then. I went to MLG competitions, which my first one was in 2007. And then I also created my own female MLG team and sent them off to competitions. I also did a lot of pro bono work with gaming websites. I wrote gaming articles, I did marketing, communications, and event planning. Once I found out that I can make a career in games, I left Penn State University and moved across the country to Seattle, Washington. My mom wasn't super happy at first, but she finally came around. My big break was in 2009 when I went to my first gaming convention called Penny Arcade Expo, or known as PAX. Through my mutual friends and Gamer Chicks community, I met someone that worked on the Xbox Live enforcement team, and they had a job opening. So I applied, and a month later, I got my first game industry job. Throughout my years in the games industry, I have worn many different hats. I have been a QA tester, a social media and community manager. I've done job recruiting. I've done business admin, and now I'm a producer. I worked on many indie games such as Toy Soldiers Cold War on Xbox Live Arcade, to large franchises such as PokéMoN and now Minecraft. Working in QA when I was on Batman Arkham City, I knew I wanted to be in game development. I just didn't know what to do yet because I'm not an engineer, I'm not an artist, and I'm not a designer. So what is there for me to do? I know I'm a people person and I want to make things happen because there was a project manager who was working with us and WB. And that is when I learned the term producer. My first producer job was actually at an indie studio where I wore many hats, and I learned a lot on the job as I went along. There was a lot of failures and a lot of successes, but it was all worth it in the end. And it really helped cultivate what I am as a producer today. So, what is a producer and why are they an important part of game development? So, we wear a lot of many different hats. Sometimes we have to take on the role of cat herder, where we have to get all the appropriate people, get them in the room, make sure they're all talking to each other and align on the same goals and working towards the same target. We also sometimes have to be the cheerleader, where we have to inspire people and provide inspiration even when moments are bleak for our team. We really set the tone for them, and they look to us for leadership, moral support, and guidance. We also have to make sure that we're clearing roadblocks for our team members when things are broken. We have to make sure that the train keeps on moving, we move things out of their way so they could be as efficient as possible. And that also includes bringing up risks to stakeholders when things are a little off track. Another analogy I like to use is the music conductor. Think of yourself as music conducting, and you have all these different pieces coming in one part at a time. And at the end, they all come in and create a beautiful symphony. And that is what I call game production and building a feature. Most of us actually do game production on a regular basis, from planning a meal, finding out what time you need to leave your house to get to an appointment on time, to maximizing your fast pass at Disneyland. Having these types of organizational and planning skills is the basic foundation in production, but getting great at it takes practice. Next, we're going to be talking about building features on schedule and on quality. So first, we're going to set a project baseline, where this is called a roadmap, and we want to make sure that we incorporate all phases of development. This roadmap includes a detailed list of when things are happening, who's delivering them, and the dates. So you want to make sure you incorporate things such as a design doc, when is that getting delivered, a wireframe, which is kind of a skeleton outline of what the user experience is going to be. And then we also have dates for audio targets and when artists are going to give us the final visualization. And we also have to make sure to account for dates such as user research. When are we going to have our first release candidate? Meaning, when is the first build that we're going to try to get out the door and see if it's good enough for our real players? And then also, we want to make sure that we have enough polish and stabilization period, because when services and client code comes in, sometimes they don't actually connect and causes more bugs. And so we want to make sure we account for that stabilization period in our roadmap. Having this roadmap helps paint a clear picture of when things need to come in, which is super handy when we're working with multiple people across multiple teams. And unlike business software, game development is about building an experience, an emotion for our players. So those schedules that you build out will never be 100% by the end of development. Plans are continuously evolving and changing because it requires continuous iteration in order to get that good game experience for our players. And of course, the longer the duration, the greater the risk and the more uncertainty. So because of that, there'll probably be more changes into your schedule as well. So finding out how close or far off you are from your roadmap can be done easily with your team via daily stand-ups, tracking your team's velocity, or just playing the game. And by velocity, I mean how fast are they getting their work done. Another thing we need to account for is defining success criteria. We need to make sure that when we build this feature and this game goes out live to the public, how do we know that it was good? If we don't track any telemetry on this feature, we won't know what to develop next, or if it's performing well, or if people like it. So it's something that's super easy to add in and super important, but it can be missed very frequently because we're so excited about the actual design and implementation of game development. Most important is listening to your team. They know best, and they're the experts in their areas. So if they tell you that something's going to take longer than expected, believe them and also ask more questions. While producers are responsible for delivering features and delivering a roadmap, we don't have to do it all alone. We can actually work with our team to get input from them. This also provides a more realistic roadmap. So something I like to do with my team is I put a roadmap together. I then have a meeting with my leads to go over the roadmap. And then after we come into agreement, we share it off with the entire team to make sure that we're all in alignment. So this gets us all more closely to a realistic schedule, and also creates a kind of transparency and ownership when everyone's involved in the decision making. So once development starts, we start breaking out the work. We discover that it's a little bit more complex than we expected. And we have to really rely on our project management triangle, or the iron triangle as some may know, where quality is constrained by scope, cost, and time. In production, we have many levers we can pull. Sometimes we have to cut back on the scope. Sometimes we have to add more time on the schedule, or other times we just have to add more resources, whether that's hiring more developers onto the team or just moving around the resources within our own team to have more people on deck. sometimes it's also not possible to trade off between these constraints. For example, adding more devs to a feature won't make it go faster. It actually could slow things down because now you have too many people in the code base working on the same thing, which can lead to more complications than it's worth. In my experience, the most common lever that you're going to focus on is managing scope. So, as mentioned earlier, you want to be building an experience for our players. So as more often than not, finding the experience requires so much playing around. And it's going to be no surprise that people are going to come to you with new feature requests mid-development. No matter what, don't be the no producer. Because if once you say no all the time, people are going to be coming less to you. And you want to make sure that you remain approachable the entire time. This is where you can really rely on your backlog, which is a list of things that you want to get done for the game. And so with that backlog, you can make more informed decisions of what takes importance versus the other. So the way this all ties in together is that I was working on adventure crystals, which is this feature in Minecraft Earth where you get to play life-size adventures in augmented reality, for those of you familiar with Minecraft. And we were at the end of development where we can actually get this on device and test end to end. At one point, my dev manager comes over to my desk, starts asking a bunch of questions, and I can kind of tell where this is going. He starts asking about design and implementation and the UI. And that's when he says we need to change the entire UI flow. See, what ended up happening is the screen that we implemented was very complicated. It had many screens and steps that the player had to go through. They had to go to a screen where you had a list of your crystals, and then once you activate those crystals, you go to another screen where you select your active crystals, and then it takes you to another screen where it actually goes on the map. And he was right, it was overly complicated, which brings us to my next point of figuring out the reason for the request. Because I took a moment to listen to him, I figured out what the problem is that he was trying to solve. And from there, I was able to use my best judgment and use my resources available to pivot quickly. So with this, I was able to get a lot of people in the room. So I made sure to include my dev lead, my dev manager, the main engineers working on the feature, since they have a say in what the technical limitations are and how costly and risky it could be. I also made sure to include my UX designer, which is user experience designer, and my design lead and design manager, because they have a final say in what the overall feel of this feature is going to be. I also made sure to include my artists because they have a say in how it's going to look for our players. Now, I know what you're thinking, and you probably think this is a very expensive meeting, and yes, it is. That's a lot of people in a room to be taking up about an hour or so of their time. But sometimes these kinds of meetings are needed because you need to be able to pivot quickly and you need to make a decision now. However, so we went through this whole flow and it ended up being a much better user experience because now we boiled it down to one screen. So this is an example of where I was able to reduce scope and the amount of work for our devs and also generated a better user experience for our players. So it was a win-win all around. After the meeting, I went over to my desk and I typed up everything that we just discussed. This is to make sure that we were all on the same page and there was no miscommunication. And most importantly, I wanted to make sure that I understood what they were talking about. And so this is where you have to document and over communicate. And then once we were in alignment with that, I sent it off to the rest of my team just for transparency's sake. So that's super important, especially when you're making a major pivot like that. You need to make sure that everything is documented and with your new plan of record. Because of the healthy relationships that I have built across my teams, this has allowed them to instill trust in me. So when I come to them and propose any kind of design changes or we need to make any pivots, they are willing to work with me instead of against me. So I encourage all producers to make sure to work on building that healthy relationship with all members of your team. So in the next few slides is we're going to talk about how to ensure quality and stability. So first off is we're going to talk about self-hosting. And for those of you not familiar with that term, self-hosting is essentially a fancy term of saying getting your game on device so you can play it and feel and see how it feels like a real player would experience it. The reason self-hosting is so important is because we want to get shippable code into production way ahead of release before we send it out to players. This gives us a time to really stabilize the build and make sure we have enough bake time, as we call it in game development. Also, oftentimes what I've seen is you don't see certain bugs until they get out to production and they just interact and things just break. So allowing us to self-host ahead of release to the public gives us all that stabilization and bug fixing time that we desperately need to have a really nice, smooth experience for our players. Something really cool that we used at Minecraft Earth is the features of feature flags and flight groups. What this means is that we are able to put our feature behind a feature flag, and this way it goes out in production, no one sees it, no one knows that this feature exists except us. And if we want to, we limit it to a certain flight group, which is our internal team, and then this way we can play it ourselves in the live environment that players are experiencing, but without them seeing it. The benefit of this is that we're able to see how all of the features interact with each other. We are ahead of schedule, and also if something's not ready, we just don't turn the feature flag on, which is very helpful, and we've definitely used them sometimes in game development. Something I'd recommend is that if you are in a 2-week release cycle and you want to try this self-hosting and like putting behind feature flags, try get it in 2 releases prior to releasing to the public to allow enough time for bug fixing and stabilization. I cannot stress this enough, but please play test your game and play test often. All you have to do is get a bunch of people on your team, go play the game on a regular basis. Put it on the calendar. On my team, we do it every Friday where we all play as a group, go play our game, and kind of see what it feels like for our real players. Now, this is where the cheerleading part of production comes in, because most often than not, they're going to want to do something else. There's always something more important. This is where you have to try to figure out how to motivate your team, whether that's having contests, giving out prizes because people love free stuff, or you can just bribe them with food and alcohol. That usually works as well too. Figure out what motivates your team and make it happen. If given the option, set up user research. The importance of user research is that it gives us a different perspective and lens that we may have not seen before through playtesting. The reason for this is because we playtest so often. After a while of playing your game over and over again, you start to become numb to the bigger issues that's happening. Oh, that bug that's been really bad in the beginning, but then after some time, it's really not as important anymore, and you just kind of get used to it. I know I've had those issues like, oh yeah, that's a bad bug, but this is how you work around it, and then you just move on. Having user research brings in new perspectives and different people who've never touched your game or feature, and so they're going to give you honest feedback, and that is what you want in order to get the best user experience in game possible. And another thing that user research does is that they provide you a report at the end. So they tell you exactly what the feedback was, the highlights, the lowlights, and some suggestions of what to change. As developers, it's super important that we don't get defensive and we listen to user research, because if not, that same feedback is going to come up again with our real players. This is a super obvious one, but I need to say it is, do not add large or risky things towards the end of the development cycle, no matter how shiny and cool it sounds. So in Minecraft Earth, we have this challenge system, which when players complete a challenge, they get a reward. Last holiday break, I remember we were wrapping up the build. Most people were getting ready to go on vacation for a few weeks, and one of my executives comes over to me brings me to a room and asks me a simple question. Can we throw snowballs in AR? Immediately, I knew where this was going. But I didn't say no. I took a moment to pause and I just listened to him. I went over to chatted with the dev to see how risky it is and what the cost is. And it was just, for the most part, it was a simple change. Just a couple hours, but just not enough time to test case the edge case scenarios. However, it got developed, it got in the game. We went through a full test pass, which is making sure that everything is working as it's supposed to be. And everything was fine. We went off in our merry way, went on holiday break. The challenge gets released over the holiday break and it is broken. No one can play this challenge, no one can complete it, and no one can progress, and no one can fix it. So, lesson learned. Don't put in large risky iterations at the end. I know I won't be doing that anymore. And our last point to ensuring quality is listening to QA, our quality assurance team. They know best on the feature and they know the health. I have a really close relationship with my QA team where I can go to them and ask them simple questions and they can tell me how the build is doing, what the health of the feature is, and any other concerns that they may think about. I encourage you as producers to do the same. They are an integral part of game development, and make sure that their voices are heard and we support them in any way possible. So now we're going to be talking about more of the fun part of production, because after all, it's more than just user stories and task tracking. It's important to remember that as a producer, you are their peer, not their manager. Our main job is to remove roadblocks from them, communicate and coordinate across multiple teams, make sure that their voices are being heard and we're supporting them in any way possible. I'm sure many of you have played or heard of the game Overwatch. In this game, you have to pick a role, tank, damage, or support. So think of producers as playing a support role, where your main job is to boost the overall performance of your entire team. And every once in a while, you may have to play the role of tank and take some damage. Next thing is admitting you don't know the answers. When I started out, I was so scared to admit this because we don't know all the answers as much as we want to. Starting out in my career, I was afraid to say I don't know, because if I said that, then that means they'll think I'm a fraud. I don't belong here. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not good at my job, which is just further amplifying my imposter syndrome voice. But actually, when you say that you don't know, they gain more trust in you because they know that you won't lie to them or take them down a different rabbit hole. Something that my mom always says is, no te metas en camisa de once varas, which is a hard way to explain into English translation, but what it means is don't get into things that you don't understand, because it just causes unnecessary problems that you may or may not be able to recover from later. And plus, you don't want to lose that trust and relationship with your team. As a producer, we have to frequently ramp up and ramp down on features. And so we have to be fearless with asking questions. If we know the answers, we can help our team the best. So when I was working on Adventure Chest, which is a chest that's found in adventures and it gives you a reward when you open it up. I remember we were in a lot of meetings and we were talking and there was a lot of jargon being passed around. World ID, GUID, loot table, and I'm just trying to keep up. And I'm thinking I'm understanding everything, and then they're trying to figure out, well, who rolls? Meaning, who decides what the items are going to be in the chest? Is it the server or the service? I'm in the meeting, I understand everything, great, we all break and go our separate ways. I go back to my desk because I'm about to write an email. Crap, I don't know. I actually forgot already what we talked about. And so I had to ask so many times with my engineers and my designer, like, can you explain the loot system to me? I don't understand how this works, from the service to the client to to the design, the loot table, like just explain everything to me. And they explained it to me so many different times, and for some reason I just wasn't getting it, and it was so frustrating for me and kind of defeating, because as a producer I felt like it was my job to understand this fully. As you get more comfortable with your team, asking these questions will be a lot easier. So something that really helped me is that I'm a visual learner. And so as you build these relationships, you'll be able to find out how you best communicate with your team. And so my aha moment was when my design lead sat down with me and literally whiteboarded everything for me and showed me little pictures and diagrams and explained how it all translates into this chest and rewards. Another benefit about asking these questions is that it's not only for you, but it's for the dev. Because when you ask them questions, it allows them the opportunity to think through the entire implementation of this feature. And if they don't know the answer to the question you're asking, then that means there's a whole design hole that we have to solve for now. Just as you're excited about working in the games industry or want to get into the games industry, they are too. So show that passion, show that genuine interest in what they're working on. People love talking about what they're working on. I love talking about what I work on. Not only does this build a bond with your team, but it shows them that you care about what they're working on and that you're in it for the same reasons they are. Plus, this also gives you a chance to learn on the job things that you didn't know before. I talk about all this production experience, but a lot of it has been learned over the many years and continues to evolve. And I learned from all the teams and the team engineers that I've worked with and interacted with. So a little bit at a time, I've been picking up the pieces. As you see here in this picture, I'm learning about how our store works, and that was super cool. So now there's one more thing I know about. Another super important thing in developing a positive relationship is making sure that your conversations are not always about work. Meaning, no one wants to be micromanaged. Don't go over to their desk all the time to see how their task is going, when is it going to get in, or why are they moving so slow. It just becomes super annoying to them, and it's kind of demoralizing. So talk to them about random stuff, like a simple question as, how's your day going, works wonders. And more often than not, in my experience, when I ask this question, it creates this bond and we become more and more close, and some of them I've become friends with. And being in tune with your team is very important, because that's how you keep a pulse on the health of your team. Also, more often than not, when I have these natural conversations with my team members, they bring up work. So I don't even have to ask them, hey, how's this task going along? I just have to say, how's your day? And they just naturally bring it into the conversation for me. So it's a win-win for me, because I just got my answer indirectly. Another thing is figuring out a process together. So each company I've worked at has their own process. And then each team within that company has their own set of processes. So what I'm saying is that in production, there is no one size fits all. You really have to work with your team a lot to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And that requires a lot of communication with them and trust. And so in order for your team to be successful, you need to coordinate with them and involve them in the process. Make sure that you talk to your leads a lot, because they'll help you as well in figuring out a process, because it just creates a ripple effect. And if you are all on the same page, following the same process, this is really good, because that avoids the opportunity of us versus them or anything like that. And also, it creates an opportunity for not having multiple people telling you what to do and they're all very different, because that just causes chaos. So growing up, I hated math. I remember I'd be in the classroom and the teacher asked the most basic question, does anyone have any questions? Silence. No one raises their hand. And so I'm thinking something's wrong with me, because I have a lot of questions in my head, but I don't want to say it out loud, because if I do, then I'm going to be seen as dumb, and everyone else is obviously getting it because they don't have questions. So I never thought that I'd be a technical producer. I remember sitting at home doing homework with my my parents, and they would ask me, oh, solve for X. And I just couldn't do it. And so they continued to ask me. And then next thing I know, I'm just crying and there's just tears all over my homework because it's so hard and I just don't get it and I'm dumb. So in the beginning of my career, I only wanted to work with artists and design because whenever I interacted with engineers, I get super nervous and scared, and they would start saying all these complicated things, this jargon, and it immediately brings up the emotions of learning math, and I just wanted to cry and run away. But I also knew that I needed to overcome this fear because if not, I won't be able to advance. So I needed to learn how to work with engineers. An important thing to remember is that engineers are regular people just like you and me. They like to have fun, they're silly, they're passionate people, they love showing off their code and what they're working on, and when you show excitement in what they're working on, they get excited. Another thing to remember is to not BS them. They will know when you don't know what you're talking about. So if you start going over to their desk and spewing some jargon to them, they're going to know that you are clueless. And this is really bad for you because now you put yourself in a position where they don't trust you. They think you're just another producer that doesn't know what they're talking about, and you're going to guide them the wrong way, so you're losing that trust and that confidence. Another thing to talk about is knowing when to interrupt your engineers. So engineers are constantly working on various lines of code every day and solving complex problems in their head. So the best way I can describe it is think of it as someone came over to you and gave you a long list of numbers to remember. You're going in through your head, trying to remember it and repeating it over and over and over again. And then someone else walks to you, asks you a question. Poof. That number that you were trying to remember is gone. And now you have to start over again. And this is what it's like for engineers. And so when you interrupt them, they have to start all over again on their code. Something I like to do, and I think engineers really appreciate, is that I make sure to send them a message or send them an email if it's not very important. The only time I ever go to their desk is when something is broken and on fire. So by sending them a message, that gives them the opportunity to respond when they have a moment. If you just want to chit chat with them, another thing is looking at your visuals, at your surrounding, being aware, like, oh, are they busy right now or are they just chit chatting? That's a good time. Now, I know that's super difficult right now to do because we're all working remotely. And so what I do now is I send messages like I used to do, but if I really want their attention and that's something needs to be done now, I either at them in a thread or I set up a meeting with them. Another important thing that I learned over my years is building a relationship with the engineering lead. The reason for this is because when you have that positive relationship with them, you are seen as one unit and following the same process. This really helps eliminate any kind of divide between the teams, especially since they're the one getting the code in. And this is something I learned when I worked at PokéMoN, and I've carried it ever since and has been very successful for me. And having this open line of communication and transparency with this lead allows you to make pivots and changes a lot faster. Do your research. So while it's great to ask engineers questions when you don't understand how a feature works and you want a little bit more details, you have to do your own research yourself. You have to figure out how the system works on your end. Not only is this allowing the opportunity for you to learn on the job and to come with better questions, but showing an interest is also by doing your own research, which they would appreciate. And when they do come to you with a concern or something's off track, you want to make sure that you have their back. So if they're coming to you and saying, hey, something's not on schedule, I missed this, do not scold them, don't make them feel worse about it. You want to make sure that they continue coming to you because you need to keep that open line of communication with your team. As I mentioned before, it's all about walking that fine line of the realities and demands and deadlines. So there's also times that you will have to play the role of tank again and take one for the team, and maybe something isn't actually achievable, and you have to communicate that with your stakeholders. So the importance of a good relationship. Having this foundation of how to interact with the team and maintain a good relationship really translates into the work they deliver. First of all, they're happy to come into work. You've created a positive environment to be a part of. They're able to come and talk to you about anything, work-related or not, which has been very helpful right now in keeping a pulse on the team, even while we're working remotely, since I've built all of this relationship for the past 2 years on my current team. At the end of it all, we are all real people with real struggles and emotions. So we must be making sure that we are in contact with our team and checking in on them, even during this time. So next few slides is we're going to talk about how to maintain that team culture, especially while working remote. Something that you can do is set up a Teams call that runs all day, or have Discord running all day. And this allows your team member to jump in and out of calls as they see fit throughout the day. This really helps mimic that vibe of having the hallway conversations when you're walking to the bathroom or going to the kitchen, or just generating white noise that you would typically get in an office. This also helps especially for engineers, to problem solve quickly and iterate when they can jump on a call real quick and work everything out. Because I know that's something that my team would do. They would go to each other's desk and solve a problem. Try to keep consistency of what was done in the office before. Really keep the daily stand-ups, keep sprint planning, backlog grooming. Hey, and if you had a date, lunch dates with your coworkers, try to keep that, but do it virtually now, because humans like routine, and we want to keep some sense of normalcy as much as possible during this time. Another point is to be mindful of others' mental needs and mental health and their needs. Make sure that you're checking on them constantly, making sure that they also know they have the space to take time off if needed. These are really hard, unprecedented times, so be kind to yourself and your team members. And also make sure to over-communicate and document, because a lot of it can be lost in translation, especially since we're missing the visual body cues. We want to make sure that we are super explicit when we document and write anything, because we want to avoid any misinterpretation. So scheduling online events and activities. So something that I really enjoyed at stand-ups in the office was we would constantly joke around, we would heckle each other, and we really had this nice bond throughout our team, because sometimes stand-ups can be boring, let's be honest. So when we went to this virtual mode, something that I started incorporating in stand-up is a coloring activity. This actually got started by accident. So I was doing stand-up, and one of my engineers started scribbling on my screen. And because of that, everyone else started scribbling on my screen. And all of a sudden, there's like frowny faces, stick figures, and there's heckling going on as people are giving their status updates. It's hilarious. And that, ever since that, it just kind of stuck. And so now every morning in stand-up, I start up with the coloring activity, and surprisingly, they really enjoy coloring, and it was a huge hit. Another thing to do is figure out how to do a virtual happy hour. So this is something that I did with my team about a month ago. I really was missing that interaction that we would get by going to a venue and having drinks, eating food, playing games. And so that is something that I really wanted to mimic. So what I did is I set up a Discord with many different channels, and each channel had its own theme. So there was a dance floor with music playing, there was a karaoke room, there were game rooms such as Jackbox, Rocket League, Widget. We also had a virtual photo booth, and I also worked with this company that had little cocktails in a box. And so I set up shop in the garage over at our building with beer, and people can just do drive-thrus and pick up their stuff. I also coordinated pizza delivery to everyone at the same time to kind of give that experience of us all being in one area. I even had a food station in the Discord channel where people can hang out, because I know it's super cheesy, but I wanted to feel like people are moving from table to table or going outside or being at the bar and eating food. I even had a bartender like serving drinks to everyone. And so I ended up having a blast, and this has been the highlight of this new world that we live in the past few months. I stayed up all night playing games and talking with my coworkers who are now friends, and it was a night to remember, and everyone had a blast, and it really helped with that unity, which we all need right now, and that bonding, because we all need that emotional connection. And the next morning, I remember waking up, and I actually felt like I went out, even though I was at my desk the whole time. I didn't leave my home, but I felt like I went out dancing for an evening. And this is why having this relationship with your team is super important. And this is what golfing with friends has to do anything with game development. Thank you so much for listening to my talk. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or my website. And my name is Sania Cisneros. Talk to you soon.